She arrived in Lagos with a suitcase that was far too light for the weight of her dreams. The night she stepped off the bus at Ojota, the city greeted her the way it greeted everyone, with noise, heat, and a restless hunger in the air. For a girl from a small town, Lagos looked like a living, breathing beast, one that devoured the unprepared and rewarded the cunning. She told herself she was ready. Her name carried no legacy, her pockets held no money, but her mirror had always told her a truth she never doubted. She was beautiful. Strangers had told her the same in markets, in classrooms, in church gatherings. Beauty, she had learned early, was not just a gift. It was a currency, and in Lagos she was about to learn just how much it could buy. Her first job was modest, a front desk role in a mid-sized marketing agency tucked into one of the many glass buildings that made up Victoria Island. The office smelled of ambition. People worked late, laughed too loud at bosses' jokes, and carried laptops like badges of honor. She tried, at first, to keep her head down, to work diligently, to be noticed for discipline. But in Lagos, discipline was invisible. The girl who typed the fastest reports remained a ghost, while the one who smiled widest at the boss's jokes seemed to be promoted overnight. It was in her second month that she began to understand the rules. She noticed how her manager's eyes lingered when she leaned across the reception desk, how his tone softened when she wore a fitted dress. She noticed how a senior executive brushed off a colleague's request but granted hers after a slow smile. These were not coincidences. These were signals. One evening, while others scrambled to finish reports, she lingered near her manager's office. The door was half open, the conversation light. A laugh here, a compliment there. By the next week, her desk had been moved closer to the executive floor. By the next month, she was no longer answering phones. She was sitting in meetings she had no real qualification to attend. The climb had begun. Her colleagues whispered, of course. They always did. She caught their side glances, heard the bitterness in their voices when they spoke her name. But she had already decided. In this city, the fastest way up was not through skill, but through leverage. And her leverage was beauty. The promotions came swiftly. A supervisor role in less than a year, a managerial post in 2. It wasn't her reports. Half the time, interns drafted them for her. It wasn't her strategy. Others built the plans she presented. It was her charm, her laughter at the right moment, her ability to make powerful men feel powerful, even when she was the one pulling strings beneath the table. Soon, she had the things Lagos promised the ambitious. A small apartment in Lekki with polished floors, a car that announced her arrival before she stepped out, and clothes that shimmered beneath office lights. Nights that once belonged to quiet reading now belonged to dinners in five-star restaurants, hotel suites, and gifts wrapped in shiny boxes. She wore her rise like a crown, daring anyone to question it. But beneath the surface, something subtle was shifting. Each new step meant a rival pushed aside. Each promotion meant an enemy gained. She became the girl everyone whispered about in the hallways, the one whose name was never praised in daylight but always speculated about in shadows. She told herself it didn't matter. Let them talk. Power was not in their hands, it was in hers. She perfected the art of performance. At company retreats, she was the first to laugh, the most elegant in the room. At conferences, she stood close enough to executives to be seen, but never far enough to be forgotten. She knew how to lean in when a man spoke, how to brush his ego like a delicate sculpture, how to make him believe he was choosing her when in truth, she had chosen him. There were moments, quiet moments, when she wondered if she had lost herself in the climb. When she stared into the mirror of her Lekki bathroom, dressed in silk, painted in perfection, she sometimes asked the reflection if this was who she was meant to become. But the thought never lasted long. In Lagos, self-doubt was a luxury. Survival required confidence, even if it was built on illusions. The years blurred into a rhythm of rise, reward, and replacement. She moved from one company to another, each time leaving behind whispers and stepping into bigger offices with larger paychecks. Men came and went, each one convinced he had discovered her, each one blind to the fact that he was merely a rung on her ladder. By her late 20s, she was a name in the industry. Invitations arrived in her inbox daily. Luncheons, panels, exclusive dinners. She sat at tables where deals worth millions were discussed, though she contributed little beyond her presence. Her beauty was her pass, her sex her seal of approval. And in a world where appearances often mattered more than depth, she seemed untouchable. Yet, for all the glamour, there was an emptiness she could not name. When she stripped off the expensive clothes at night and lay in her king-sized bed, the silence pressed heavy. She had the trappings of success, but none of the foundations. She could not design a campaign without assistance. She could not draft a strategy without borrowing words. She could not survive in her industry without the men who gave her access. Still, she convinced herself this was enough. After all, wasn't Lagos a city of appearances? Didn't everyone pretend in some way? Some pretended through fake degrees, others through inflated CVs. Her own pretense just happened to be wrapped in satin and lipstick. The city adored her. The city despised her. And through it all, she kept climbing. What she did not see, what she could not admit, was that ladders built on shortcuts never reached the sky. They led only to fragile perches, high enough to taste power but never strong enough to hold it forever. And as she smiled into cameras at yet another glittering event, the cracks beneath her ascent were already beginning to show. Success in Lagos never comes without whispers, and hers had grown into a chorus. By the time she turned 30, she had climbed higher than most of her peers, but the air at the top was cold and thin. She no longer blended into offices. She stood apart, a subject of endless gossip. Colleagues smiled at her in meetings but clenched their teeth the moment she turned away. She could feel it, the respect she never truly had, replaced by envy and disdain. She told herself it didn't matter. Respect was overrated. Power was what mattered. Power got you tables at exclusive restaurants, invitations to government-funded projects, and business-class tickets to Dubai. But deep down, she knew the truth. Her power was not hers. It belonged to the men she pleased, and the moment they moved on, so would her privileges. Still, she clung to the life she had built. Each new season brought another man, another opportunity, another door to unlock. But every door left behind another closed, another enemy made. Women in her industry despised her, not because they were saints, but because she had made herself the embodiment of every stereotype they fought against. She had turned beauty into a weapon, and in doing so, she had confirmed what so many men secretly believed, that women were better at charm than competence. The loneliness began quietly. First, it was the friendships she lost. In her early years, she had girlfriends she laughed with, gossiped with, planned weekend trips with. But those bonds cracked under the weight of suspicion. No one trusted her around their boyfriends, their husbands, even their bosses. Slowly, the invitations stopped. Slowly, the laughter faded. By her late 20s, her circle was gone. Then came the rivals. Younger women entered the industry with fresher faces, tighter bodies, sharper hunger. She watched them the way a queen watches rebels rising in her kingdom. First, she dismissed them. She was too established, too known, too connected. But it wasn't long before she saw the same pattern repeating. Dinners, flattery, promotions. The same ladder she had climbed was now being scaled by others, and they were climbing faster. Her reflection began to betray her. In the quiet mornings before work, she studied herself in the mirror. Tiny lines around her eyes, faint shadows beneath her cheeks. Nothing dramatic, nothing disastrous. But in a city obsessed with youth, even the smallest change felt like a warning bell. Beauty had always been her shield, and now the shield was beginning to crack. At work, she tried harder to mask her fading charm. Expensive weaves, luxury skincare, cosmetic treatments, anything to keep the illusion alive. But the more effort she poured into appearances, the more she realized how little substance she had built. She had titles on her resume, but no real skill to back them. She could host a dinner flawlessly, but she could not stand in a boardroom and defend a strategy. The men noticed too. Where once her smile was enough to bend rules, now they began to demand more. More availability, more compliance, more submission. The balance of power shifted, subtly but painfully. She was no longer the prize to be won. She was the option to be used. And still, she clung to the life. Nights in luxury hotels, designer perfumes, Instagram photos that drew envy from strangers. She told herself this was success. She told herself she had won. But beneath the glitter, cracks deepened. The first real blow came at a conference in Johannesburg. She had been invited as part of a Nigerian delegation to speak on brand strategy, a topic she knew little about. In the past, she would have charmed her way through, leaning on rehearsed lines and borrowed slides. But this time, the audience wasn't as forgiving. As she stood on stage, lights glaring, words slipping, she realized her facade was failing. Questions came from the audience, sharp, technical, demanding. She stumbled, stammered, tried to redirect with charm. But charm had no place in a hall full of seasoned professionals. By the time she stepped off stage, she knew she had embarrassed not just herself, but the entire delegation. The whispers followed. Not just gossip now, but professional doubt. She was not only the woman who slept her way up. She was the woman who could not deliver when it mattered. From that moment, the walls began to close in. Contracts she once secured easily began to slip away. Calls were not returned. Meetings were postponed indefinitely. Men who once chased her now ignored her messages. She was learning the cost of building power without foundation. The fall was always waiting, always certain. And yet, the cruelest part was not the loss of power. It was the realization that she had built no real identity outside of it. Who was she without the attention, without the glamour, without the whispers that, even in contempt, still kept her name alive? At night, she lay awake in her Lekki apartment, scrolling through photos of her younger self. The girl who had arrived in Lagos with bright eyes and unshakable confidence felt like a stranger now. She wondered what might have happened if she had chosen differently. If she had built her skills, if she had embraced patience, if she had trusted that true success takes time. But regret, she knew, was useless. The ladder she had chosen could never lead to stability. It only led to enemies. And the enemies were circling. A rival, 10 years younger, just as beautiful, just as ambitious, was already climbing in her company. She saw the way men who once pursued her now lingered around the newcomer. She saw the same laughter, the same dinners, the same opportunities she once seized. It was like watching her own story play out again. Only this time, she was not the heroine. She was the obstacle. The city that once seemed to bow at her feet now felt indifferent, even hostile. She was no longer the rising star. She was the fading one. And the cruel truth was this. In Lagos, no one remembered the women who had climbed through shortcuts. They remembered only the ones who lasted. The cost of her rise was clear now. She had traded respect for visibility, skill for shortcuts, sisterhood for suspicion, and substance for appearances. And now she had nothing left to stand on. But she still had one thing left to lose. And when it happened, it would be the fall she never saw coming. The beginning of her downfall did not come with thunder. It came quietly, like a shadow slipping into a room unnoticed. It started with a rumor, a story whispered at a dinner table, passed from ear to ear until it reached the wrong person. She had been careless, too confident in her ability to control narratives. For years, she had managed to turn gossip into background noise. But this time, the rumor carried evidence. Screenshots of private messages, receipts of transfers from a company account, pictures she thought had been deleted long ago. When the scandal broke, it spread through the Lagos corporate world like wildfire. Emails leaked into group chats. WhatsApp statuses lit up with her name. The girl who traded sex for contracts. The one who embarrassed her delegation in South Africa. The one who was never truly qualified. In a single week, the empire she had built crumbled. Projects were frozen, partnerships dissolved, invitations rescinded. Men who once begged for her time deleted her number from their phones. Women who had once envied her now laughed at her demise. She was no longer the glamorous figure in designer dresses. She was a cautionary tale. Her company released her quietly, using the familiar phrase, organizational restructuring. But she knew the truth. They had been waiting for an excuse, and now they had one. No lawsuit, no confrontation, just silence. She was erased. For the first time in her career, she searched for work without the cushion of influence. She dusted off her resume, staring at the inflated titles and hollow experiences. She had been a manager, a senior strategist, a director of operations. But when she tried to explain what she had actually done in those roles, the words died in her throat. She had no real portfolio, no projects she could proudly claim as her own. Interview after interview ended the same way. Polite smiles, thank yous, and no callbacks. The younger rivals she once dismissed were now leading campaigns, presenting strategies, winning contracts. They had something she never built, credibility. Her reflection became her cruelest enemy. Every morning, she saw the face that had once commanded boardrooms, now marked by exhaustion and regret. The lines around her eyes deepened, her glow dulled. Makeup could mask it, but only for so long. She had built her career on beauty, and now beauty was slipping away, leaving her with nothing to hold. And then came the betrayal, the one she never saw coming. Among the men who had once held her up, there was one she trusted more than the rest. He had promised her security, whispered of protection, assured her that he would never abandon her. She had given him more access than she gave anyone else. But when the scandal hit, he was the first to deny her. He leaked her messages to save his own reputation, painting her as the seducer, the manipulator, the liability. In his version of the story, she was not the victim of a toxic system. She was the predator. And in a society eager to tear down a woman who dared to rise too high, his story was believed. She spent weeks locked inside her leaky apartment, curtains drawn, phone buzzing endlessly with notifications she dared not open. The city outside moved on without her. Lagos had no patience for fallen stars. Yesterday's sensation became today's ghost. Her savings dwindled. The car payments stacked. Rent reminders arrived. The luxury she had once flaunted became a chain around her neck. With no steady income and no allies, her world shrank to the four walls of a home she could no longer afford. The silence was deafening. For the first time since she arrived in Lagos, she was forced to confront herself. Not the image she presented to the world, not the story she spun for men, but the truth she had buried for years. She had built nothing real. No skills, no foundation, no respect. Only enemies, only illusions, only shortcuts. She thought of the girl who had stepped off the bus years ago, suitcase in hand, eyes full of fire. That girl had dreamed of making something of herself. That girl had believed she was destined for greatness. What would she say now, looking at what her future had become? The lesson cut deep. Shortcuts had promised her quick power, but they had stolen her future. Beauty had given her entry, but it had denied her respect. Sex had bought her influence, but it had cost her credibility. And in the end, when the lights dimmed and the whispers faded, she was left with nothing but the weight of her own choices. Months passed. The city forgot her name. A new star rose, another pretty face climbing the same ladder she once claimed. The cycle repeated itself as it always did. She left Lagos quietly one night, her departure unnoticed. No farewell dinners, no headlines, no tears. Just another woman swallowed by the city's endless hunger. And yet, her story remained, told in whispers to young women arriving with the same fire in their eyes. Some heard it as a warning. Others dismissed it as jealousy. But the truth lingered, sharp and unyielding. Shortcuts to power are always temporary. They glitter for a season, but they do not last. Only substance endures.